RTD Slayer, thank you for the $5 super chat earlier, by the way. Let's see, what do you think Sony could make, or what do you think could make Sony make some first party games on Xbox? I don't know, honestly, like, I don't think that they will ever bring anything to Xbox, I think just out of a matter of principle. But there was something interesting that did just drop. Sony's chief operating officer said, quote, "It's been 4 months since I became the chairman of Sony Interactive Entertainment." This is after Jim Ryan announced he was retiring. He said, quote, "A big problem with Sony Interactive Entertainment that I found is that they don't necessarily have a deep understanding of how their work is being translated to growth, generation of sustainable profits, and higher margin for the unit as a whole." Now that might sound like corporate gobbledygook. Might not make a lot of sense, but let me just break down each of these as crisply as I can. So we all know within corporations, the name of the game is servicing the shareholders, right? That's the primary directive. That's your goal. Your obligation as a corporation is to serve the interests of the shareholders. If that means that your employees suffer, unfortunately, that's what it does. That's why you end up with layoffs, right? Because it's not about servicing the employees and then the shareholders, it's shareholders, then employees. Or in the case of, you know, for the console wars, it's a matter of servicing the shareholders, not necessarily the fanboys who have for some reason tied their personality to a hunk of plastic and silicon. So what he said is that he's entered in and he's started to reevaluate a lot of this stuff and the business models within Sony Interactive Entertainment and found that there are some problems. For one, a deep understanding of how their work is being translated to growth. I think, you know, one of the things that's come out in the last couple of weeks is analysts have been comparing PlayStation 5 numbers with the numbers from the PlayStation 4. And the PlayStation 5 is tremendously successful, but it's still not on the level of PS4's pure volume of sales. Part of that, well, and specifically like software attachment to hardware, but part of that could be that it just economically right now people don't have $500 to just freely spend on a console. With the PS4 generation, a lot of people had 2 or 3 PS4s, especially by the time we got to like the PS4 Pro era. You might have a PS4 Pro and then a PS4 Slim, and then maybe you also had an original PS4 that you stopped using because it sounded like a jet engine and was basically a space heater. So there were a lot of things with the PS4 gen, but it seems like they're trying to figure out how they continue to grow the business beyond just doing what they've done before. And that's, again, making sure the shareholders are happy. What shareholders are looking for is growth, because if a company stays exactly the same, share prices are going to stay pretty much identical, if not drop due to inflationary pressures. And you might pay out dividends and stuff, but that's basically how you get one of these big like utility type companies that has had the same share price for 50 years and they pay out a 7-cent dividend every quarter. And that's just what they do. They don't really grow, but they don't shrink, and they just do what they do. That's not what technology investors are looking for. They want to know how you're going to grow your business and how the share is going to increase in price. With PlayStation, I think this is an indication that the fear is that they are kind of at a standstill. They won the console war basically in terms of hardware sales and console participation on these big AAA games. But like everybody is already aware of PlayStation. Everybody who really wants a PlayStation probably already has one. So where do you go from here? How do you grow revenue? Well, Xbox has been asking themselves the very same question, haven't they? They've been asking themselves the very same question on the flip side. Because they're like, hey, everybody who would have wanted an Xbox probably has an Xbox by now. So where do we get more revenue? How do we grow and increase those dollar signs? Well, maybe third party. Maybe bring in some of those first party games to other platforms. Generation of sustainable profits. Sustainable profits, these are some things, you know, he also mentions it with margin for the unit as a whole. When I hear like sustainable profits and higher margin, that to me screams of like games as a service, live service games that can operate relatively cheaply over longer periods of time, bringing in consistent revenues through microtransactions, season passes, battle passes, that type of thing. Because it's a lot cheaper to run a game like Helldivers 2 for 2 years than to develop an entirely new game that's going to sell 2 million copies within the first few weeks, but then barely sell anything for the next 5 years while you work on the next game. They'd much rather just have a really successful live service game that just prints money indefinitely. So it seems like they're evaluating that, trying to find ways to do it and find ways to work around it. It also screams to me price increase, potentially. I mean, I think that the way that they would do it is they wouldn't raise the price of the PlayStation 5. What I think they do, though, is that they probably have a higher margin on the PS4 or PS5 Pro. I think that that's very reasonable to expect. I've said for a long time that I think Sony is often viewed by the gaming community as sort of the Apple of the gaming space. They view Sony as having the premium product that's a little more glitzy and glamorous. And it's also in some ways like a social status thing, which is why you see people have like their PS5 in the back corner so everybody can see that they have one. It's a little less so now because of course the PlayStation 5 is more accessible now, but for the first year or two, I mean, go back and watch some videos of YouTubers and streamers from back then. People would have like their PS5 Pro or PS5 Pro, their PS5 box, like sitting in the back corner, just in frame so you can see that they bought one. Because it was like a social status thing, you know? It was kind of weird how it happened. In the same way that everybody on the planet who bought a Vision Pro headset from Apple, every single one of those people that bought one has told everybody that they have one. Nobody bought a Vision Pro and sat in their bedroom using it for 30 minutes and then was like, okay, that's cool. I would tweet about this, but nobody cares. No, everybody's bragging that they have one because they want to flex that they have $3,500 to waste on something. With this, I just think because they have that social status, because they have the premium vibe with it, I do think Sony could get away with having like a $700 Pro console. I think they could get away with it. I think there would be a little bit of uproar initially. Some people would be upset about it, but I think that they could easily get away with it. As for like the PlayStation 6, people have been saying, oh, well, if Microsoft does what they're planning on doing with multi-platform releases and stuff, they might stop making hardware and then, you know, there will be no competition. So they'll have $1,000 PlayStation 6. I don't think that they would launch a PlayStation 6 at $1,000. I think they would try to get it to the $500 mark, maybe $600 at the highest. But I do think there is a market for people to pay extra to have a more powerful device. Personally, and I'm saying this from a point of extreme privilege as a YouTuber, okay? Like, I do this for a living. This is my work. If I buy a PlayStation 6 or PlayStation 5 Pro, for me, it is a business write-off when I'm using it in the studio. So this is this is not a normal use case, okay? But I'm saying that I would personally love it if there were a version of the PlayStation 5 that could play fully native 4K games at a full locked 60 frames. I would love that. That's all I really want. More storage, that. Give me the ultimate crazy double XL Elite Plus Pro Ultra version of the PS5. And I would like that. Even if it's $1,000, that for me would be awesome. Not everybody would buy it, but I do think a lot of people would. I do think a lot of people would. If the PS5 Pro was $700, it would need to be a lot more powerful to be worth it. Well, and that's where it's going to come in, where it's like, is this going to be a matter of incremental upgrades? Or are they just going to be like, okay, now it's the PS5 Pro and it can do 4K natively at 60. And like, that's all we're going to do. That's the extent of what we're pushing. Or are they going to do the push for like 8K checkerboarded or something, you know? Because when they dropped the PS4 Pro, they were like, oh, it does 4K. And when they sold the PS5, they were like, oh, it does 8K. They had the 8K symbol on the box, even though nothing can actually export at 8K. It was just like, technically it was able to output a signal at that resolution. It's just stupid. To be fair, and to be just very, very clear, I think nobody needs an 8K display. Like, you don't. The size that you would need for an 8K display to be worth it and to be visibly useful, you'd have to be sitting like 6 feet away from it, and it would have to be 100 feet diagonally. Like, it would have to be so freaking stupid huge. It would be so stupid. It would be ridiculous, just outrageous. Let's see this. The full quote from him. Actually, I'm the chairperson of Sony Interactive Entertainment. It's been about 4 months, and I'm trying to demonstrate leadership, trying to have as many meetings as possible with the management team. I also visit studios, and everyone is working really hard to fulfill their responsibility to try to optimize the business, and and I understand that. But overall growth and sustainability, or sustainable profitability, or increasing margin, how will that translate to these goals? I don't think people understand that deeply. I think that is the problem of the organization. So as far as I'm concerned, I try to understand what is happening in the company, in the industry, and also in the perspective of the analysts, and try to explain in a transparent manner so that people can recognize and notice these issues so that we can have a harmonized approach going forward. That is a very general comment since I became the chairperson. There are concrete points which I will not go into today. Quote, now I'm visiting the studios. I've had meetings with the leadership there. The studios, people work in the studios have very high motivation. They're very highly motivated. They're very good people, and they're very creative people. They have great creative minds. They also have knowledge about live streaming. However, having said that, when it comes to the business itself, I think there's room for improvement, and that's got to do with how we use the money, or about the schedule of development, or how to fulfill one's accountability towards development, etc. Those are my frank impressions, so I will continue to engage in dialogue with the people so that we can find the right way to proceed. I don't think that this guy's like, so you're just going to lie? No, I mean, this is exactly what he said. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay. Yeah, no, that's what he said. That's funny. So it's just, they're trying to find ways to unify it more. And I think for PlayStation, this generation, there's been sort of a slight disconnect where they've wanted to increase margin, profits, and sustainability of profits, and consistency of revenues, for sure. And one of the ways they decided to try and do that is with investing heavily into live service games. And they're trying to do that, but at the same time, they've seemingly been struggling to get single player games out the door at a steady pace. Yes, they've had God of War Ragnarok, but that was also like a PS4 cross-generational game. So it wasn't like a full-on exclusive. And they've had Spider-Man 2, which reviewed fine, and they had, or even well, it didn't review as like a masterpiece, but it reviewed well. But they haven't had that steady drip of like twice a year, a first-party Sony game that just blows everybody away. You know, even something like Helldivers, as far as I understand it, Helldivers is not a first-party Sony game. It is published by PlayStation, but it's not a PlayStation studio. Maybe I'm mistaken on that, but I thought that they are technically just the publisher for it. But either way, like it just seems like they've struggled to get a steady drip of those games out. And maybe they're just giving them extra time, and starting next year is when we're going to start getting that steady drip. Maybe they're waiting for the PlayStation 5 Pro to come out, and that's when they're going to showcase like the next Santa Monica game and the next Naughty Dog game, and they're going to be like, yeah, look at this. It looks so good on the PS5 Pro. You got to go buy that. It launches on the same day as the PS5 Pro. Maybe that's what they're planning to do. I don't know. But it is strange that we basically have nothing for the rest of the year coming from PlayStation first party. And everybody's like, what? It's very weird. It's very, very weird. I think everybody's still sitting and waiting, hoping that they have something up their sleeves. Like they have a DLC kind of spin-off game for Atreus from Santa Monica coming. We all thought they were working on that, but then they dropped Valhalla. So now people are wondering if that's the thing they've been working on. Who knows? Yeah, and like, look at this. This just happened here. Another thing for Sony. PS5 entering the latter stage of its life cycle, Sony says. After sales of the PS5 failed to meet expectations, Sony has said the console is entering the latter stage of its life cycle. Sony had set an ambitious target of 25 million PS5 sold during the current financial year ending March 31st, 2025, but has now revised its forecast down to 21 million after PS5 sales during the commercial holiday or crucial holiday 2023 quarter came in lower than expected despite aggressive promotions. Sony sold 8.2 million PS5s during the third quarter ending December 31st, up from 7.1 million sold during the quarter the previous year. Okay. But it's not enough to hit their lofty target. According to Bloomberg, Sony Senior Vice President Naomi Matsuoka, maybe, said the company now expects sales price of the PS5, or the sales pace of the PS5, to start falling from the next fiscal year, which begins April 24 and runs until March 25. Looking ahead, PS5 will enter the latter stage of its life cycle. As such, we will put more emphasis on the balance between profitability and sales. For this reason, we expect the annual sales pace of PS5 hardware to start falling from the next fiscal year, which kind of reaffirms what I was saying earlier, that it seems like most people who really want a PS5 have one, and little things like the slightly smaller version aren't seemingly driving many sales. I think a PS5 Pro excites a lot of people, and a lot of people would go out and buy that. I don't know if it's enough to make up the, you know, missing the forecasts by 1 million units for a holiday season, but I do think people would buy a PS5 Pro. But this is the crazy thing. Like, it feels like this just came out because we haven't gotten a lot of exclusive PS5 games. We're technically like headed into 4 years into the generation. Most generations are 6 to 7 years. That's the extent of it. We are over halfway through this generation. At least we are supposed to be. Yeah, one game that may be set for the PS6 launch title is Hideo Kojima's return to the action espionage thing, Fizzent. Yeah, we'll see what that even looks like. Who knows? Death Stranding 2 has a 2025 release window, and based on Sony's latest comments, probably won't come out before April 25. Fizzent wouldn't then be expected until 2026 at the earliest, possibly 27 or 28. PS4 came out in November 2013. PS5 came out 7 years later. If this pattern repeats itself, then the PS6 will come out November of 2027. But we do know Microsoft is targeting 2026. So do they just let Xbox have their own hardware, exclusive next generation hardware for a year? Is PS5 Slim worth the upgrade? No, I mean, it's literally not an upgrade. It's just a smaller form factor. It's like the whole reason they designed it and put it out there is because it's cheaper to ship. And so they have increased margins. Like that's the whole point. And it's simpler to have like one base SKU that you can then sell a secondary attachment for. Let's see, Rid or RTD Slayer, thank you for the $5 again. I could see Sony bring, for example, Last of Us Remastered to Xbox and say, hey, want the sequel or proper remake? Come to Sony. Maybe. I think it would take a lot from the executive side of things to make that happen, because I think that they have so much pride in some of those exclusives that they wouldn't bring it. It's the same thing. Like if they brought Halo to the PlayStation, I think that would be such a bad, like just for sake of optics, it would be such a bad look to be like, yeah, this thing that is so integral, it's like key to our DNA, it's now everybody's. Like I just think that looks bad. I can't think that they would actually do that. You know, it'd be like if Apple came out and was like, okay, you can now use Siri on your Windows phone if you somehow still have one, or yeah, Siri's now available on the Meta Quest. Like it just wouldn't really make sense. Like, okay, technically, I guess now more people can use it, but I'm not sure if that's actually worth it. I think they continue to bring live service games. I think they continue to bring some of these like Sony published games to other platforms. I still think that they have a weird hatred, not weird. They have a disdain for Xbox, and they just as a matter of principle aren't going to bring it to a rival console, but they'll bring it to PC, I have no doubt. I think that's just a no-brainer. Also, Fearless Wolf, thank you for the super chat. Considering a console over $600, you might as well get a PC at this point, especially for versatility and upgradability. Consoles only have exclusives going for it, but even that is becoming blurred now. Yeah, I mean, the one thing also with consoles is that you get an ecosystem, and you get, allegedly, you're supposed to get a reliability that comes with them. So when you buy a game on the PlayStation 5, you know that it's going to run pretty damn well on the PS5. You know that you're going to be able to just hit the button, it launches it, plays it, and then you're good to go. On PC, there's all sorts of questions of like, well, is it optimized for the type of GPU I have? Oh, it's not. Like, that sucks, and so I'm just screwed. Like, there are plenty of games where it's just like, oh, you use an AMD based system, screw you. Like there's a lot of, unfortunately, games kind of like that. And on the flip side, there are other games like, you know, Starfield at launch, which for whatever reason didn't support DLSS. So if you had an NVIDIA graphics card and you wanted to use frame generation or DLSS stuff, you're just screwed. It was like, nope, you have to use FSR2. Sucks to suck. There's always pros and cons to both. I mean, I agree, going with a PC, you get a PC and you get everything else that comes with it. And you can play games and everything, but it's not always what everybody's looking for. He took my thing.